My name is Sari van Pooije. I run Intact Academy. I have a school for coaches and consultants in 8 different countries. You can find me on www.intactacademy.com. The other thing I do is I'm an expert in business innovation. So we help businesses innovate more quickly than their products. And you can find that on www.teamagility.com. Now, what we're talking about here is transactional analysis. And transactional analysis is a tool I use very often to help leaders grow and to help coaches and consultants learn their craft. We talked about contracting, ego states, transactions. We talked about the 5 ways people keep their own story going so they don't solve problems in reality. And now we're going to talk about the second understanding of symbiosis. I already explained a little bit about what symbiosis is, but we actually talk about 2 levels of symbiosis, and within that, a couple of types. This is important to know and to recognize, because depending on the type of symbiosis, you have a different way of dealing with it. So that's why I teach leaders, coaches, and consultants this concept. So when we do symbiosis, what we talked about first is that we have one person who's actually acting like a parent adult, and the other person is taking on the child ego state. So in a way, as a whole, 2 people who have 3 ego states each actually pretend they have 3 ego states between them. And so they're bound forever in a way, because they're propping each other up. One person is keeping the boundaries and the values of the parent ego state and keeping the thinking going of the adult ego state. And the other person is actually translating and holds all the needs and emotions in that relationship. That can be functional, as I said before, but it can also be dysfunctional if it's based on a discount of your own capacity or the other person's capacity. We call that one a first order symbiosis, where we see that the one person with the parent and the adult excludes their own child ego state, so is not connected with their own needs, emotions, and intuition. And the other person excludes their parent and their adult ego state, which means they're not in connection with their own problem-solving capacity and their boundaries. Mostly, this first-order symbiosis, as we call it, is based on what we call a second-order symbiosis. So on the surface, this is what you see. But underneath all of that, what's actually going on is that this person with the child ego state is propping up the other person. They're saying, look, I'll take care of your needs as long as you do my thinking for me. And it's a very, very archaic way of keeping that going, probably much younger than what you see on the surface. And that, we call that a second order symbiosis, where you see people taking care of each other in a really childlike way. Like when you see this is going to be really sex stereotype. I just saw a documentary on Barbie dolls, 100 years of Barbie doll. But where you see little girls taking care of their Barbie doll in a really like childlike, very exaggerated way. Like they go, stand in the corner. And you go, what? They must have heard it somewhere. But you see that they take care of that Barbie doll as if it was a second order symbiosis. Of course, boys do it too, but I can't think of an example at the moment. So we have first order symbiosis where you see this dependency at the surface, but usually that's propped up with what we call a second order symbiosis, where at a psychological level, really the person who seems dependent takes care of the other person's needs. And of course, a lot of marriages and relationships are based on that. That's okay for a little while when the other person is really in need. But when you do that all the time, you're stopping each other from growing. This is only possible if it's a replay really of your old symbiosis with your parents. And this may sound a bit technical, but really when you're born and when you haven't developed an adult parent ego state yet, you are dependent on your caretakers. When that hasn't been resolved properly, so when the parent hasn't let go of that symbiotic, when you still have a parent or caretaker who says, I need you to fulfill my life, for instance, you're still in the symbiotic relationship. And you can see that that person reenacts that with their relationships later on in life. We recognize two types of symbiotic relationships in later life that we can see. One is really where the basic one, where you actually see this parent-adult with child, and they complement each other, and so they remain dependent all their life, really, where this person is expected to take care of the other person and do their thinking, and that other person takes care of the child needs and feelings of the first person. We call that a basic symbiosis. We also talk about a second type of symbiosis, which you sometimes see. When you see relationships or marriages, they bicker all the time. They go, nya, 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 no, nya, nya, nya. We call that a parent competitive symbiosis, where the other person really tries to get the person A really tries to get person B to over-adapt all the time. Both of them are discounting needs or feelings, and both of them are into that competitive form where they're saying, you know, I know better than you. And they're also bound to each other, but in a very unhealthy way, because neither of them are accounting for all their ego states or their needs. Sometimes you also see relationship based on what we call a child competitive symbiosis. For instance, sometimes I see relationships where they go, I'm sick, no, I'm sicker. And so they both need the chicken soup at the same time. As soon as one of them expresses the need for the other to take care of, the other person goes, no, I'm incapacitated too. And you see this really child competitive symbiosis going on, where the other one is, where they're both demanding care. And then at a certain moment, one of them explodes and goes, you know, starts persecuting, really parenting the other person, and goes, why are you're always sick. I'm sicker than you. And you see this switch. We'll talk about that later. But what I'm talking about really is that a symbiosis is usually based on what you see. So one person taking care of the other. Underneath, we have a second order symbiosis where the person who's being taken care of is actually taking care at a very archaic, very young level of the first person's needs. And we also see three forms of symbiosis in relationships. A basic form where there's more parental to child behavior, a parent competitive form where they're bickering and really fighting about who's right, and we see a child competitive form where they're bickering about who needs to be taken care of most. It's very easy to recognize that in relationships, but it also happens in organizations and between leaders and employees. So I've seen this basic form of symbiosis very often, where I see that a leader takes on the thinking and strategizing alone for their team, and they push their employees in a position of being the ones who need taking care of. Where I think really in an adult-adult leadership employee relationships, you see much more problem solving that's shared. So yes, you are in the position of a leader, but the relationship of leadership and followership does not have to be symbiotic. So I'll explain that a bit further. So hierarchically, in the structure of the organization, you may be in a higher position, but at a human level in the relationship, you do not have to be the one who solves problems all the time. You can share this problem solving capacity with your employees so you don't get into a symbiotic relationship.